In the American South, there's a saying, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. Because a mockingbird sings beautifully, its melody fills our hearts, and it never harms crops or gardens, it only sings for us. Killing such a bird is a sin, and causing a mockingbird to die under the barrel of prejudice, bias, and narrow-minded thinking is equally sinful. In our lives, in the world we inhabit, how many mockingbirds are there? They exist because of differences in geography, gender, profession, hobbies, and precisely because of the pervasive habits of prejudiced thinking. They are like classmates bullied at school, colleagues isolated at work, kind people who offer help only to be accused of seeking personal gain, those from rural provinces, and many in the LGBTQ+ community who are constantly withered by biased eyes in this indifferent, melancholy world. In many families, wives are expected to act a certain way, while children have no right to comment on adults. And you yourself, how many times have you been hurt by the prejudices and narrow-mindedness of others? The classic novel To Kill a Mockingbird begins with its very title to convey a profound truth to readers. You never truly understand a person until you walk a mile in their shoes. In the story, the main character and narrator is a young girl named Scout, who lives with her brother Jem and their father, Atticus. The author chose a child's perspective to show us that all distortions in life must begin to change through education. And the highest form of education for all of us and our children is to learn to respect differences. For adults, the primary discipline is to manage one's own biases. A classic novel by American author Harper Lee, it has been translated into 40 languages, won the Pulitzer Prize, and influenced the world profoundly. Obama once publicly gifted 2 books to his daughters, and this novel was one of them. The title of this section is Walk a Mile in Someone Else's Shoes. Have you ever killed a mockingbird? A malevolent phantom living in that house. That's what the folks in Macomb said about the eccentric Boo Radley. Boo's house was always shut tight, while others only closed their doors on frigid winter days or when someone was sick. Boo never came out. All the children feared Boo. Jem even described him as 6.5 feet tall, eating raw squirrels, with a scar across his face, yellowed rotten teeth, bulging eyes, and constantly drooling. But the funny thing was, the kids had never actually seen Boo. It was the prejudices of the adults around them that fueled the children's subjective imaginations. During that dull summer, the children constantly came up with new games to pass the time, and they repeatedly tried to sneak into the eccentric Boo Radley's yard, hoping to coax him out. Yet, what they perceived there was still shaped by rumors. The path in front of Boo's house was their only way to school. The kids discovered that Boo often left small gifts for them in the knothole of an oak tree near the gate, chewing gum, medals, carved figures. One day, Miss Maudie's house caught fire. Scout and Jem stood watching the townspeople put out the flames. When they returned home, Scout was astonished to find a blanket draped over her shoulders, without knowing when it got there. Another time, when the children snuck into the eccentric's house, Boo Radley's brother caught them. Jem, in a panic, fled, unfortunately snagging his pants on barbed wire and having no choice but to leave them behind. The next day, at the knothole in the tree, those torn pants had been neatly mended and folded. It was Boo Radley who had quietly performed such warm gestures. No one knew that when Boo Radley was young, he made a mistake and was confined to his house by his family for 10 years. From then on, he grew accustomed to a solitary life, learning to use awkward smiles instead of cold, dull words. Simply for not conforming to the majority's way of life, Boo Radley was labeled an eccentric by others. Have you ever thought someone was eccentric? Have you ever felt cold, uncomfortable, irritable, angry, or hateful towards someone just because they were different from you? A philosopher once said that most of us are against prejudice, but everyone has some. We always think we don't hold biased views towards others, believing that prejudice only takes root in the brains and hearts of the foolish and evil. But in reality, each of us, more or less, holds prejudices. The philosopher Socrates compared humans to prisoners looking at the world in a cave, their bodies bound, and the world only discernible from the shadows cast on the cave walls. They believed what they saw until they stepped out of the cave and saw the sun, only then realizing their initial biased thoughts. Therefore, when facing differences, when disagreements arise, when someone acts, thinks, or expresses things contrary to your liking, please remember that you too are living in a cave, and others are prisoners just like you. Only when you acknowledge that you, at any moment, harbor the intent to kill a mockingbird, can you truly examine your own character. When you don't judge easily, you can recognize the limitations of your own thinking and truly respect differences. An eminent thinker of classical German philosophy once said, "I respect any independent soul, although some I do not actually accept. Understanding others is a form of compassion, and managing one's own biases is the primary lesson for every adult's self-cultivation." How do we protect the mockingbird from the barrel of prejudice? The small town of Macomb was suddenly abuzz with news of a shocking rape case, a white girl assaulted by a black man. What stirred the townspeople even more was that the defense lawyer for the black defendant was a white man, Atticus, the father of the main character, Scout. Neighbors rushed to criticize him, feeling ashamed that he was siding with a black person. Even his own daughter was angry with him, asking why he would help a black man. But he gently reminded his child not to use the word nigger when referring to black people, calling it an ugly and malicious slur. In reality, Atticus knew well that fighting in a place where racial discrimination ran so deep, the chances of winning the case were almost nil. But he believed he had to do it to be worthy of raising his children. It was his deepest conscience that made him unhesitatingly put in his best effort. Even if the world runs against me, I still only want to live true to myself. For him, there was only one thing that could not follow the crowd: conscience. Throughout the defense, Atticus was mocked everywhere by white people. The plaintiff in this case was Bob Ewell, the father of the girl who accused of rape. He later gathered a group of white men to plan an attack on the jail to lynch Tom. Upon hearing the news, Atticus immediately went to the jail alone, sitting by the gate to protect Tom. Faced with the threat of attack, he did not get angry but remained calm, despite his children's anxiety. Their friends ridiculed his children, saying, "Your dad has feelings for niggers," which made them furious. But Atticus calmly told his children, "You may hear all sorts of nasty talk at school, but just do one thing for me: hold your head high and keep your fists down. No matter what anyone says about you, don't get angry. Try to fight with your mind. If the majority thinks they are right, then of course they have the right to think that way. And they also have the right to be completely respected. However, before you can get along with others, you must get along with yourself." One might wonder what precious thing that black man gave Atticus to make him so determined to defend him, even risking his own life. In truth, that black man gave Atticus nothing precious. His name was Tom, a kind, humble man who often helped the white Ewell family, who lived nearby, whenever they needed. The Ewell family's 19-year-old daughter, Mayella, was abused by her father and had lived a very secluded life, rarely interacting with the outside world for a long time. So, when she met Tom, she immediately fell for him. One time, she found an excuse to ask Tom to help fix a door, and then took the opportunity to try to kiss him. Tom frantically pushed her away. As he rushed out, he ran straight into her drunken father, Bob Ewell. He saw Mayella and thought his daughter was ruining the family's reputation by associating with a black man. Afraid of losing face if this story spread, he threatened his daughter to accuse Tom of rape and inflicted the injuries on her face himself. On the day of the trial, despite the inconsistencies in the testimony, ignoring the clear truth that Tom, with a disabled arm, could not possibly have inflicted those injuries on the girl, the all-white jury still declared Tom guilty, purely due to racial prejudice against black people. Atticus fought to the very end, yet he could not win. In the end, Tom lost faith in the justice system. He attempted to escape from prison and was shot dead. This was a tragic ending, and when the novel was published, many people offered conflicting opinions, refuting it. They questioned why Tom couldn't win the case, arguing that it didn't imply white people would forever feel superior and prejudiced against black people. But we need to acknowledge a painful truth. At that time, prejudice in people's hearts was piled up like mountains, and no matter how hard one tried, it was almost impossible to shatter. Atticus, alone and solitary, protected Tom from those prejudices. This symbolizes the weak voice against bias in society, but no matter how weak, you must still speak up, just as Atticus told his daughter when she was enraged by the court's final decision. Someone on that jury realized Tom was innocent, and that's progress. Even if the light of hope is as fragile as ignorance buried deep in human thinking habits for a long time, we must still fight to the very end, protecting others from prejudice and protecting ourselves from the biased thoughts of those around us. Although Tom had passed away, Atticus's conscience, courage, and integrity led more and more white people to support him and black people to love him deeply. And you will realize that to save yourself and other mockingbirds from bias, we must first learn to manage our own biases. No matter how noisy the outside world may be, you must learn to turn a blind eye to the prejudices others hold against you. In this world, the less understanding a person has, the more they like to criticize others, because their thinking has long been rigid and they cannot tolerate even the slightest difference. The more aware a person is, the more willing they will be to be tolerant of differences. And only by respecting differences, respecting the opinions, choices, and desires of others can you have a steadfast heart, unaffected by surrounding prejudices. Then your inner self will be as calm as a river, harmonizing all differences. You will not be controlled by the words and actions of others, nor will a biased remark from someone make you flare up in anger, sadness, or hurt. Lightly dismiss and disregard such things so you can dedicate more energy to your own goals. As the philosopher Zunzi once said, "A gentleman of talent can tolerate the weak, a wise person can tolerate the ignorant, a broadly learned person can forgive the shallow, a person of pure conscience can forgive those with complex hearts." Therefore, please remember that only by respecting and embracing differences can we live well in this world full of prejudices. And the second thing we need to do is to start with education. Psychologists have shown that prejudices are thoughts deeply embedded in our minds, created and influenced by our families, relatives, schools, and living environments. In the book *The Diamond Cutter*, the author points out that, in reality, definitions of a person, an action, or an object are often empty or neutral. They themselves have no fixed meaning, but people tend to attach different qualities to them. It is people's subjective evaluation that determines whether something is perceived as good or bad. There's a story. A white mother and child hailed a taxi driven by an African man. The child asked her mother, "Mom, why does the driver have different skin than us?" The mother smiled and replied, "God created people with different colors to make the world diverse." The black driver, deeply moved by this, refused to accept payment from them upon arrival, saying emotionally, "When I was little, I asked my mother the same question. But my mother told me that we are black and destined for a lower fate. If my mother had answered like you did today, I might have a different sense of self now." This is the impact of education on people. In a simple way, it determines how a person perceives things, and more profoundly, it can change the trajectory of an entire life. Just like Atticus, the father in the story, he calmly and patiently educated his children so they would gradually remove the biased colors and sounds from what they saw and heard, and slowly realize that in this world, differences are nothing to be afraid of. What is truly terrifying is the bias and arrogance in human thinking. In the three-body problem *, there's a famous line, "Ignorance is not an obstacle to survival, but arrogance is." You need to know that deep within every biased thought, there very likely exists a belief that I am superior to others, a belief that white people are superior to black people, that city dwellers have the right to mock the accents of those from the provinces, that people in the LGBTQ+ community are abnormal or a different species. So, are they truly distorted, or are you just looking at them through a narrow slit? And finally, to put down the gun, don't let it point at innocent mockingbirds. I hope you listen to the teachings of Father Atticus. Reading is like breathing for humans. Even if you don't like it, you must do it to recognize biases and change ingrained ways of thinking. Reading is the most effective way. It's a very simple act, yet too many people in this age cannot perform and maintain it. So, remember that when you cannot change your background or living circumstances, when you cannot change others, the only way to overcome the prejudices of the era is to read. The philosopher Schopenhauer once said that the obstacle preventing people from discovering truth is not the illusory nature of things, nor a defect in human reasoning ability, but prejudice what we have accumulated beforehand. The most precious thing for all of us from reading this book is to accept the truth that both you and I, to some extent, hold prejudices. Both you and I have been, are, and will be mockingbirds, and we also have the potential to point a gun to kill another mockingbird. But it's time for us to bravely use our inherent, beautiful conscience to protect the mockingbirds. Read extensively, learn deeply to broaden your perspective, so you can be ready to accept differences with a serene soul. When your inner self is full, when your thoughts expand, then those people you don't approve of, those things you're not satisfied with, will gradually fade away.